So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining in the finance sector meetup this month. Um, as we met earlier, there were quite a growing interest around agentic AI and how do you actually put things into production. And that's the question that we all are trying to answer. And with that, we've got Rajashri. So Raji is a product lead at Lloyds Banking Group, and she's currently leading vision strategy and product delivery for Agentic AI observability, and so that the bank can monitor and manage the autonomous agents at scale. It's a pretty interesting and a hot topic, as you would agree. And Raji comes with great expertise around enterprise AI, intelligent automation, digital transformations. She has been a long-time practitioner in the world of finance. Um, so yeah, that's me. And before we start, Raji, I've got a question for you. So agentic AI is moving faster than the government frameworks meant to contain it, right? Every week, every month, there is an announcement, and then we all go by. What does this mean for us, both as an individual or as an organization or as a lead? So here's a question: which firms will get it right, and what separates them from the ones that won't? So, what do you think?
Fantastic question. Great note to start this on. So, hello everybody. I'm really glad to be here. So the simple answer to this is the firms that have actually figured out assurance as an operational discipline are going to be winning at this, are going to be able to get ahead and handle the changes that happen, rather than thinking about assurance as a checklist like we currently do with a lot of software development lifecycle. Because the ones that get it wrong will probably not fail very loudly, because autonomous agents don't crash with a loud noise, they sort of drift. And by the time anyone actually notices this, it's probably a compliance event, a regulatory issue. And that's why this operational discipline is undergoing a massive shift in mindset, in the approach to it, in how you operate, how different roles evolve. And I hope that through today's session, I can build some context around it and what this means for the practitioners on this call. I do have to add a disclaimer. I probably won't have answers to every question you have because it's the nature of this, but I'll try my best to answer based on what we are, what I'm working with and what I've heard from a lot of others, at the conferences and things that I have been part of. But yeah, this is a very interesting space, and happy to get started.
Perfect. Now I'll hand over to you, Raji, without further ado, since you've got so much experience in
Awesome.
regulated industry.
Cool. I hope my Zoom doesn't give up on me while I'm getting this done. Okay, can you all see my screen?
We can. I think you'd want to put on the presentation mode. Perfect.
Yeah, cool. So, today I'm going to talk through a practical guide to assuring agent AI, and we'll cover some practical patterns for evals, guardrails, and observability. So to just sort of set the context of why is that assurance is getting a very big spotlight right now for agentic AI, and why is it a priority? I'm sure all of you already know that fundamentally agentic systems are quite different to your traditional ML systems or digital systems in that reasoning varies. So for the same input, you might have the agent taking different actions based on the context of the conversation, the memory it has on you as a user, and the intent of it, therefore shaping a different outcome and response every interaction. And with agentic system, especially when we get onto autonomous agents, you have to scale without human review, especially when you have low risk agents, and you have a lot of volume of decision. So having a human in the loop is going to be quite onerous. And that means sometimes you will not have a human in the approval step. So that adds an element of risk, but also means assurance needs to be more tighter, robust. And silent failures, like I already mentioned, agents don't crash. Obviously, you'll have your standard errors, etc., alerts, but it's quite different in the way that behavior drifts over time. And I'll touch on a few of this as we get through to evals and observability. This is essentially invisible, unlike a digital interface where you know exactly what that button, what that link is expected to, what that interaction is expected to land for you. From a financial services perspective, there's a big regulatory context that we need to be aware of. I'm sure you already understand. So from the point of view of FCA, you have existing regulations and policies around consumer protection and senior management certification regime, consumer duty, and EU AI Act. On the top three, what has not fundamentally changed are the laws. It's not a separate AI law, especially within UK. What it does is it ensures that any agent or AI system that we launch still meets these regulatory contexts and policies and regulations as required. So you still need AI governance, but you need to provide model risk assurance, sustainability, consumer protection. On consumer duty, customer outcomes are equivalent to agent outcomes, even if you don't have a human in the loop. And evidence is required for each of these assertions and interactions. And from an SMCR perspective, you need named individuals to be held accountable if anything goes wrong. And the three questions you need to ask before you get started, or is what will give you confidence that an agent behaves correctly and within policy before it goes live? Can you explain any specific decision to a regulator, auditor, or customer if you're asked about it? And finally, when something goes wrong at 2 a.m., do you find out first or does your customer find out first? We'll see if we can answer those by the end of the session. Within a lot of you might be familiar with the agent patterns. What you will see is from left to right, going from the simplest pattern to the most complex pattern. So you have single agent and tool calling. It's just a single trace and interaction. And this is where most teams should start with their agent build as you pilot, test, and learn, and then get into production. The next stage is intermediate. So you have orchestration and agent workers. So you have an agent that then routes the responses or sort of the requests to individual agents for specific domains, specific action scenarios. And here, as an example, lending agent, fraud agent, vulnerability agent. So the number of errors can compound here. You need a chain of visibility across each of those branches of agent calls. And you also need coverage across a different set of scenarios based on the risk tiering. The last bit is where it gets more complex for assurance. We have model context protocol, MCP, and A2A protocols, where you can then chain together agents which are not only within your own ecosystem, but outside the boundaries of your company and firm. It could be vendors who actually are part of the agentic journey. This could be others who provide explicit service, or these could be external tools that you are invoking as part of that agentic journey. So the complexity increases in terms of assuring across this end-to-end journey. The systems that you need visibility into, especially those you don't own, which are vendor-owned, partner-owned. Governance challenge, how do you enforce policies, boundaries, and guardrails? And how do you make that visible and auditable? Because that's the end goal, right? Like you will need to evidence something irrespective of how that chain works together. So what does the life cycle look like to get into production? You have your standard life cycle: design, build, run, optimize. But for agentic AI, what slightly is different is within design, you start with controls being defined, which tells you about the agent scope, the tool scope, whether something is authorized and authenticated to access something, essentially your risk boundaries, as well as the scope of access and data access as well for each agent, for each tool. Now, in addition, as part of the design, you need to understand who will be escalated to. Do you have a human in the loop or human on the loop? Understand your escalation paths and blast radius of if something goes wrong, how far will it impact the agentic journey? And then finally, you need a completely different mindset in the way you operate. You will have to have risk, compliance, security, and responsible AI teams right from day one, part of the design. So generally, we tend to think about governance and all these folks as after the fact, after you've got to build, they come and do some lovely governance process, approvals. We've all been through that, especially within financial services. But a lot of that shifts left. And it's critical because if these people are not part of your design, they will be part of when you need to go live and you get a rejection to say, hey, you're now gated because you've not met these thresholds, you've not met these responsible AI dimensions and scores. That takes us next to the build. So this is the evaluation of scenarios for the agent journey. So you build something called as a golden data set, a set of scenarios across that end-to-end, inspired and taken from real customer scenarios. So if you're going from a digital workflow to an agent that does that work, you will have enough instances of where things have gone wrong, complaints that have risen, or risks that have come up during that execution. Use those to inspire a golden data set and then measure and add thresholds to test the trajectory of the agent's execution. This is where it's different. Generally, testing is about sort of a pass and fail gate. It's quite binary. But here you're thinking about that end to end. Does it take the intended path? Are the tools being invoked as is? And finally, adversarial testing. This is where you need to red team, understand policy edge cases before launch. And again, this is a very collaborative effort. On the run bit, you get to guardrails and observability, or guard and observe. There are 4 layers of guardrails. So input, output, policy, tool permissions. These are all active or during runtime. You have a level of behavioral sampling of the interactions of the live conversations that are scored. And then finally, audit trail to ensure that you can actually trace everything, each interaction, each turn, each response, each memory invocation, each file or RAG tool call, or call to any customer data, for example, if that's part of your agentic journey. And finally, the optimize. In software development, we see this as support features coming back into our backlog and taking a bit of time before it actually gets optimized. This changes the pace of change, especially when you have guardrails getting breached, policies not being adhered to, and therefore you will need to tighten observability thresholds as you learn about guardrails, and you need to go back and update the agent design to ensure if any guardrail or policy breaches occur, then you're able to version and quickly get back into the customer hands, or have alternate paths to decommission, kill agent if it's actually drifting way off and creating customer harm. What are evals? Sorry, Abhishek, are you saying something? Sorry. What are evals? So essentially, evals are nothing but these are repeatable, structured test cases or scenarios that you run to understand how an agent behaves. It's not just checking that it does the job. Does it do it safely? Does it do it within the policy and the controls that have been designed as part of your build? And are they appropriate for the context? And if you think about it, there are 2 types of evals. One is offline evals, which is sort of pre-deployment, and this is quality before launch. And then you have online and runtime evals, which is an evolving capability that not a lot of teams have adopted. So it's very early stages, even for the platform teams, that agent development kits, etc. And this is run during live or when live conversations happen. How they are different, offline evals, you try to adapt and update your golden data set with every agent version, with every model or prompt change that happens within the agent instruction. Risk tiers. Usually you need to have a bunch of use cases that traverse critical, high, medium, low. These are very use case specific. So between product risk, compliance, responsible AI, you determine what are the dimensions and what you want to evaluate. And what does that mean in terms of the impact if the agent doesn't behave as expected? In terms of the dimensions that you can actually evaluate, there are plenty, right? And what I have shown is some things that you should generally consider when you're building out your agent. So trajectory accuracy, policy compliance, boundary behavior, tool use, hallucination. You have a bunch more available, including escalation, handoff quality, as well as customer outcome signal and conversation quality, to name some additional ones. Ultimately, the aim is that your agent behaves within the policy and the boundaries defined pre-launch. Runtime evals gets a bit more interesting because imagine the volume of conversations you can have, especially if it's like a critical journey for your customer or as part of your bank's definition. You need to regularly sample these live conversations and pick a subset of the dimensions you have run for evals, for your offline evals, to stress test it during runtime, because that's where you will catch drift. And compare it to the baseline that you have assured before launch. This is real-time detection because evals are very much a point-in-time view of quality of the agent, but you don't know how your customer will interact with the agent. You don't know what sort of responses are going to be brought back because of the context, the memory, and a lot of other variables that are involved in this. And finally, runtime evals should be integrated with observability, because this is how you start the feedback loop, right? You integrate evals and understand where exactly things are sort of drifting, understanding where the guardrail breaches are happening. Going into guardrails, guardrails essentially are nothing but runtime controls. You designed it, you have evaluated it. Now, how do you know that it's actually triggering as expected? And this is purely the set of policy controls and boundaries that you have set, well beyond conversation quality and the other sort of factors that impact a conversation. There are 4 categories here, which are bare minimum in my view of what you need to assess and sort of design for runtime control. Input validation, injection attacks. The surface for attacks has increased with agentic AI. You can have people injecting adverse media as well as toxic language, discriminatory language. Your input validation should check all of those along with your standard PII, data protection, not providing PII in the input field, redacting it, how you store it, all of those get carried on from the input. Policy enforcement, this is all about enforcing policies. These could be policies very specific to a journey. So for a use case, these could be regulatory compliance and risk ones, which are more generic. And it's about where you find the balance and what you want to start monitoring. So consumer duty is one of them. Vulnerable customers. Now, I think the biggest challenge here is, I think the ability to block or flag where you have detected vulnerable customers becomes important, especially when generally these customers reach out through another channel, like your voice channel. And this is where you can actually test those scenarios and see what's happening, whether the escalation gets to the right team, the right individual when a vulnerable customer is detected. Tool permissions, I've spoken about this, but this is about least privilege, tools having access to the right data and only the right tools. You have authorization, authentication rules being applied, ensuring that tools are limited to read only unless and until you explicitly want them to write something back into the system. And finally, output filter. So this is about the response. This is checking the language. For an example, advice versus guidance. This is a massive rule within investment banking that you need to tread very carefully between advice and guidance. So you need to monitor the recommendation that comes back or the response that comes back. Factual accuracy, has it hallucinated? Has it read something incorrectly, how do you flag that? And then obviously any disclosure requirements. At the bottom, you can see human in or on the loop. This is, again, part of your design. You need to understand where you want human in the loop, which is essentially an agent specifically hands over to your human in specific cases, versus where you want human on the loop, where they're just monitoring, where they're just checking how things are, and only intervene when there is a need to intervene. And there is a nuance between both of them, and how you design your use case and your agent journey around this will be very critical. Because if there are vulnerable customers and the language detected is that it's, they are not in a, it can cause customer harm, you need to intervene. So how do you design for that escalation or handoff versus actually there's an error and you need to just kill the agent and then restart it, for example. This is a critical point as part of guardrails and your general assurance. So ensuring fairness and eliminating bias. Agents can produce unfair outcomes at scale invisibly. I think we've established that fact, right? And where it starts getting, really critical for us and becoming a regulatory event is when unfair treatment of customers happens, and it's a conduct risk, and it's not just a quality issue, especially within financial services. So there are some mechanisms with which this can be done. However, one of the things that I want to stress again is you will need to design these, plan for these in collaboration with responsible AI, who write up your responsible AI governance, your agent behavior, what are the thresholds that are acceptable. But also risk and compliance with domain experts who know this very well. Things like demographic testing, so vary the input and your eval golden data set across different demographic factors like age, language, vulnerability, protected characteristics. There are 9 protected characteristics that people, especially from a customer outcome, vulnerable customers perspective, you need to make sure that there is fairness and that if for a vulnerable customer, there are fairness failures, either through false negatives, like you've missed the vulnerable customer's need, or there are false positives where you're over-triggering escalation and it's disrupting the customer journey. Those are both seen as failures. So you need to be able to calibrate it. And that can be done through your controls by design and evals testing. Monitoring is you monitor at the segment level, because the aggregates, I'm not a big fan of averages. Average measures are the most poor measures in my view. So aggregate metrics can hide disparities that happen, and therefore it's important that we are able to look at this as a set of metrics where you can understand what's happening within the aggregate. And outcome tracking and outcome testing, these are critical. So there are a couple of things that a lot of companies already do on outcome testing, but where you will need to start thinking about the separation is your model risk and model outcome versus your agent outcome, because it's a number of different tools and services that add on to this. A lot of this then needs to be independently reviewed either by the responsible AI team or the audit team to ensure that there are any changes required, anything that doesn't still meet our regulatory responsibilities, then we are able to handle it. This is my world. This is observability. This is my bread and butter for the time being. And it's quite different to your standard traditional software observability in that there are different aspects that we will need to look at, especially as product leaders, senior leaders. What you see here is how I have categorized them from a time horizon. Immediately, what you need to take care of from observability, the value, what you need to focus on this week versus over time. And the way these tiers change are, imagine that a customer has complained, You need to be able to go and pull a trace and see what actually happened, what was the conversation, why did they raise the complaint, what was not met, and what guardrail was triggered or policy breach, so you can go and follow through. And from a audit perspective, having access to these traces is equally important. Audit used to look at a more aggregated level. They're now getting quite down to the details of individual conversations. This week is more within what has changed and how has that then evolved, or have we done a change in the agent and have we been able to see the change getting validated with the additional with the new conversations? Are we able to find a pattern within the escalation or handovers? What's causing escalations, triggers? And from a RAG tool perspective, understanding whether there's stale data. And finally, the last horizon is sort of trending over time. This is about governance decisioning. If you've seen a pattern where a policy compliance is declining over weeks, it's not just a tune, it's about taking it back to the drawing board and requires product and governance decision. Commercial, we don't talk enough about this, but every interaction, every turn, every response costs dollars. And with the volume of conversations that are expected, if you go from, for example, Lloyd's has 21 million digital customers. If you translate that into agent conversations, you can see how quickly it can rise. I'm sure it's the same for a lot of other organizations as well. As a CIO, as someone who holds the purse for cost and the P&L, this is going to be one of the numbers you would be interested in and making a decision on how you optimize the agent. And finally, drift. This is about the agent's behavior and the entire baseline shifting and deviating. This is a very quick example of what that might look like in reality, right? Like you have the investment guidance agent. So some of the challenges is, obviously, I mentioned investment versus advice boundary, understanding that, ensuring that any repeated breaches are not accumulated and you have the right human in the loop designed. We have a named individual personally accountable, consumer duty, that appropriate guidance is given for the appropriate customer. So across evals, guardrails, observability, and the operating model, which I'll come to in a minute, assurance enables that the agent is actually behaving within the guidance boundary, that there are no breaches in the policy, and that is only showcasing the relevant investment guidance, and where required, a human is able to step in. And the way this is done is there are multiple ways in which this can be handled. You start with a small number of conversations, you launch to a small subset of your customers, review it manually because you're also learning about the agent. So it's not a one shot, you go from getting it live and everything working perfectly. So you start with some level of manual reviews of the conversation. You identify where things are probably straying. You adapt your design, your guardrails, and then incrementally change the agent and tweak it as you go. And collecting the traces, each response, each prompt, and providing and reviewing that overall as the product team is where it is. What happens when assurance fails? I think I have probably repeated a couple of things already around impact to the customer, regulatory event occurring, and the business case eroding. And this has not only financial consequences, but also reputational consequences, especially in such a hyper-competitive space, building out agents that can actually deliver services in a safe and compliant manner. Operating model. I think the biggest mindset shift and operating model shift is a bit of ensuring that your agentic build team is not just product and engineering, which is currently the standard pattern of teams, but you have risk, compliance, and responsible AI representatives as part of that life cycle. and you have them co-designing with you, because engineering and product bring in the agent and technical understanding knowledge, and the others bring in their domain specific knowledge. And I can tell you that when we didn't, or when you don't have this model and you get to red teaming, you will see the agent actually using expletives and not behaving in a way that you want it, especially if you're a customer. But also the other way, right? Like customers abusing the agent also happens. And you can see how that can then impact how the agent then learns and responds to any future conversation. So this is so critical, and you need to start with this in mind, right? You need to think about your operating model as you get started, rather than an afterthought. And this is based on the lessons that we have learned, like rather than trying to fit governance, trying to embed responsible AI, risk compliance after you built an agent and trying to redesign, you include them right from the start. Obviously, you have audit then who have a higher responsibility now compared to before. And this is one of the teams that has a demand on my product team, or what we are building out. And what this helps prevent is, like I mentioned, a sign-off gate which you're blocked against just before release, controls being misaligned, catching an issue quite late, fairness and outcome testing not planned for or not evaluated as you build, and an audit gap then emerging, which can then trigger additional FCA concerns. So, what does this mean in terms of where we started with? So, firstly, operational confidence is not a destination. It is what you build and sustain across the full life cycle. And if you go back to the 3 questions I started this session with, what gives you confidence it behaves correctly and within policy before it goes live? Can you explain any specific decision to a regulator, auditor, or customer if asked? When something goes wrong at 2 a.m., do you find out first, or does your customer? On the design side, the most important thing you can do is convene the right people before any code is written. So you have risk, compliance, security as part of your design meetings. And security, again, like I mentioned, there's a larger attack surface from a security standpoint. On the build, before any production release, the question to ask is, what does critical scenario look like for this? And have we tested and red teamed it? And if that question cannot be answered, the agent is not ready to deploy. On the run front, you know who your alert owners are, your named alert owners are. And this is the most important operational decision before a go live. It's not just who gets the alert, it has who has the authority and the context to step in and take a decision and act on it at 2 a.m. And finally, on the optimized side, which is about closing the loop, the feedback loop, you want someone to ensure that your runtime findings actually inform your next design iteration, and you include it as part of your life cycle, and that you have reviews scheduled, not only by incidents, but again, when you go back to design, the operating model sort of kicks in. You have risk compliance, security, parties coming in and looking at where the agent went wrong, and then optimizing and changing it. So to conclude, embed controls, evals, guardrails from day one. You need to ensure that your operating model is adapted for agentic systems. You need to reimagine how this is done. You need to ensure that you're very clear on accountability and authority to actually action when agents go wrong. And finally, think of this as a healthy feedback loop right from day one. On that note, thank you, everyone. for patiently listening to what I had to share about evals, observability, and assurance. And yeah, happy to take any questions. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Raji. Um, one of the most interesting line for me, well, of course, there are plenty of information to take away. Governance is embedded and not added on. That's personally, I'm taking it away. Um, so we've got questions, quite a few. Um, are you able to see the tabs, or would you like me to read, Raji?
I I think I need to go into Q&A, don't I?
Yes, you need to go into Q&A.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so a couple of questions from John, and then we've got Jeremy, who's asked a few.
Yeah, so FCML's review is the obvious one. How does the activity proposed change in light of the recently published work of Sheldon Mills? So I haven't read the Mills review fully, but what I can tell you is the way that we are approaching it within Lloyd's Banking Group is we are looking at governance from a completely different light. And that's the start of it, right? How do you embed governance within the life cycle? How do the roles change? Those are the things we are starting with. So I'm not quite sure, John, if it answers your question, but that's how we are approaching it within Lloyd's. But if you can share a bit more around Sheldon Mills, I would probably need to go Google this or ask an agent. Um, The next one, can we please check on the CP name? Yes, I will double check that one. I will go double check that before we publish the pack. Thanks for the shout. Given that there is an obligation of KYC, KYB under CDD regulation, KYP for working with partners, is there an expectation in the future for there to be a KYA that, oh yes, fantastic. I would say yes. This is very, very early days. So it revolves around agent identity, your agent skills, agent instructions, what sort of domains have what sort of agents, and how do you manage that and evolve that. So definitely something that we should look forward to, especially if you have an internal agent development platform and you're building repeatable, reusable agents. It's very important you know which agent you're interacting with, what the scope of it is, what sort of access, data, tool, authorization it has to respond to a customer. What methods would you recommend for flagging hallucinations? Human review of multiple live agent outputs? Recommend. So this is part of, so one, in terms of flagging hallucinations, first is as part of your evals, having clear scenarios where you can test that out. You could have human review of multiple live agent outputs, especially if you're just starting out. If it's that first version and you're releasing it to a subset of customers, you can actually have human in the loop or human on the loop reviewing it. Both are acceptable, but it depends on your risk tiering, the volume of conversations you anticipate, as well as your individual use case, and also having a way to manage your RAG source. Have you seen a significantly lower or higher rate of customer complaints and assurance failures since introducing agents? Have you seen a significantly lower or higher rate of customer complaints and assurance failures? Early days. We are very much early in the journey, at least from my experience and expertise. We do see people engaging with the agents and a sensible approach is generally starting with agents that are a sort of medium or low risk. You assure that, and then you test and learn. And that is what I would recommend. So I don't have a specific benchmark as yet on is that significantly lower or higher. I think in another quarter that should become more evident. And this is based on my experience.
Okay, and I think the last one is from Grace.
How do you ensure meaningful human oversight? People often assume having a human in the loop ticks the box of accountability. However, in practice, this is a fantastic question, Grace. I think the challenge is it's not only that human in the loop ticks the box of accountability. Uh, Humans can quite quickly fatigue if you have a large volume of approvals. And if you're doing the same monotonous task of actually reviewing something, there's a likelihood that it's not just going to be about ticking the box, but it actually creates more issues in terms of human motivation, human value as part of your organization and as part of the agentic journey. So the way to ensure meaningful oversight is it goes beyond just evals observability. This is about your organization's view on how do you manage workforce in the new world. You're going to have a workforce which is part agents, part humans. You could have a manager overseeing agents and human beings. And it requires deliberate design, uh, reviewing, reimagining how you operate. And that's not just at the technical level, it's just generally workforce design, workforce and talent design, including finding an appropriate way to manage, for example, performance, right? Like performance reviews between agents and humans. When you're only doing human oversight, it's very difficult to manage your performance. Like, how do you benchmark? How do you see growth? Some questions there to answer. Uh, so quite simply, like if you're looking at just practically how do I design for human oversight, that will come down to your individual use case if that's what the intention is. But I took this as the more larger question that will impact all industries that are looking to adopt agents and agentic systems. Because human oversight in and itself is not going to be helpful. And this is where observability, automated checks, over observer agents, audit agents, all of these are things that would then come in place. So an agent observes an agent, an audit agent audits an agent, another agent, and the role of the human alongside it will adapt.
Perfect. That brings us to the end of Q&A. Um, Thank you, Raji, for patiently answering all the questions. Um, that too with your practical experience.
Thank you.
Hey, now this brings us to the end of the session. Um, Thank you very much, Raji, for joining us today, taking out time and sharing your practical experience. The space continues to grow, and folks on the session, Raji also does a few writings around the overall product AI product management space. Do follow her on LinkedIn, and I'm sure we can get her back for another session in some time. Um, so on your screen, it's the Data Lab community. Scan the QR. It's a free community, and it's growing month over month. And there's a finance sector group. Please do follow finance sector group and reach out to your finance sector champions. So I'm one of your finance sector group champions, and Conrad is another one. Let us know what you think, what more you would like to see, and let's keep the conversations going on in the group. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.